Hello everyone and welcome to Whiskey Wednesday. We've had one cat in before, now we've got two. He's a little bit shyer and he'll probably be clawing at the microphone, so I apologise if you hear any intense noises. Part 2 of High West Week, Rendezvous. It's all about cowboys and traders, so I've broken out the denim to feel at home with them. It's a High West video. There are 2 Maker's Mark badges underneath my microphone, but we like all brands, so it's not an issue. What is Rendezvous Rye? Well, originally it was a blend of quite old rye whiskies, sourced from MGP and Barton, I believe. Roughly about 16 years old in its original integration. It isn't 16 years old anymore, which has caused issues with some people because it's still the same price. I've never tried the 16-year-old version. If I had, I was unaware of it. This is the first bottle of the stuff I've ever owned. The only thing that has remained the same is the high rye mash bills. So one of them is a 95% rye mash bill, and the other one is an 8-year-old rye mash bill, both anywhere between 4 to 6 years old. The Rendezvous itself is to talk about trading within Utah and the western part of North America between about 1840 to 1860. Alcohol isn't something that they would have traded. It would have been pelts and, crops and things. But it's just a nice throwback to that. And I really like the labels they do on these. It's just a nice bit of history. And American history is my favorite history because I'm not a fan of monarchs. It just gets a bit confusing. So that's the rye. Amazingly, this does actually contain some malted rye. I have never knowingly tried anything that has malted rye in it. So that's interesting. And again, if you want very specific details, by all means, if you head to the High West website, this is batch 19K18. But we'll put the bottle to one side and we'll taste it. So mostly rye whiskey, it's an all rye whiskey featuring 2 very high rye mash bills, which might warn a few people off because rye can be a little bit political in its sense, but let's see what it smells like. That is the largest hit of green pepper and caraway that I've ever had in my entire life. Really earthy, spicy flavours. Significantly more caramel and vanilla than what was on the American Prairie Bourbon. A lot more caramel. Quite a spicy nose. It is 46%. It's the same as all 3 High West we'll be reviewing, but the rye is really kicking up a fuss on this. There's a slight minty note coming through, almost like eucalyptus. But I cannot get over how much more caramelly the rye is compared to the bourbon. I think they do use not necessarily all virgin oak. I think they are using some maybe first and second refill casks. But you are getting so much sweet, soft, spicy, earthy, almost like liquorice-y notes of this. Yeah, not as... Even though I said it is quite spicy, it's more welcoming than I thought it would be. I know that sounds quite contradictory, but that caramel has really rubbed off. This bottle's been open for just over a month, and it did not smell like that when we first opened it. But let's taste it. Much softer on the palate. Those big peppercorny, caraway seed, licorice spices, they're not rare. The first sip is just that big indulgent wave of caramel. It's very malten, it's nice and thick. So only after you actually swallow the whiskey, it is a little bit simpler on the palate. I don't necessarily mean that's a bad thing, because the smell is these 2 huge contrasts. But yeah, the palate a little bit simpler, not as complex. But then the spice comes back round in the finish. And it's less of those earthy spices and more of a kind of toasty, oaky, I don't want to use the word tannic because it doesn't really have any European or wine influence, but that I'm aware of. but it has an almost slightly drying European oak quality to it without having that kind of raisiny taste, which can become a little bit predictable. Okay, second sip. Starting to get more of what we smell on the nose. I'm a big ginger fan. I love it in everything. It's one of my favourite things to eat and to drink. Big ginger beer fan. There is a quality of that in there, but really like, what's the word I want to use when you kind of boil down a sauce? Very concentrated, like really intense, almost like raw ginger. The bitterness that comes along with that kind of drying spiciness. Almost rum-like taste to it. It's a big hit of sugar. There's really nice ginger flavours. It does have a molasses quality to it. Having never tried malted rye singularly, I'm unsure where it fits in, or unless it's the combiner and making these big rye mash bills work together in some way. But that's delicious. It is a lot more expensive. It comes in around £70 a bottle. And it is only that sort of like 4 to 6, maybe 8-year-old stock in there. I still think it's very good though. And even with the 30 quid price hike, that is pretty tasty. It's going to get an 8 as well. Maybe if it was only like 10 or 20 pounds more, it might have pushed up to like an 8.5. But for the contrast in flavours we get, it's delicious. It's very well made. It's very well balanced. At 46% with no colouring and no filtration. But given that big age drop, I can see why people might go for the bourbon first, because it is this beautiful, soft, sweet, fruity thing. But yeah, that is the Rendezvous Rye. That is a solid 8 out of 10 from me. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully there won't be many more cat interruptions as we go on. But we'll hope to see you all next week either way, and thank you for watching. Cheers.